I was late to the birthday supper for my younger brother. It was just late enough for everyone to be deep in conversation, with laughter resonating off the restaurant walls, drinks half empty, and plates already cleaned away. It wasn't late in the typical sense. It's the kind of late that nobody sees you enter. However, I didn't think anyone would notice. These family gatherings were usually like that. For a few seconds, I stood in the doorway, looking around the table. Seated in the middle, my mother proudly leant in and placed a soft hand on my brother's arm. While my sister browsed through her phone and laughed with her fiancé, my father burst out laughing at something my cousin said. Nobody raised their heads. I approached gently. Nothing, though. I was not given a seat. Every chair was occupied. A big table with 10 chairs and 10 persons was reserved. The 11th was mine, the extra. I waited for someone to notice me standing awkwardly next to the table. Silently, I cleared my throat. After glancing over, my mother returned her attention to my brother. "Oh," she added bluntly, "you're here," as though I were merely someone she dimly remembered inviting. "We assumed you wouldn't show up." "No one informed me that the time had changed," I said, maintaining a calm tone. Even though my hands were a little unsteady, I shoved them inside my coat pockets. She shrugged when I sent it on the family group chat. The family group chat did not include me. No more. After I informed my sister that I couldn't watch her children on a weekend when I was working, she kicked me out months ago. She texted me, "There's no point if you can't be trusted." I was not added back by anyone. I looked around. Nobody was relocating to create space. Nobody was even attempting to pass me a dish or move chairs. My dad chewed into a piece of steak. My sibling took a taste of his wine. I stopped the waiter as he went by. "Would you please get us another chair?" He appeared perplexed. "Ma'am, this table seats 10 people. Let me see what I can accomplish." I stood there like a stranger as he left. My cousin Zoe leaned over and added, "I mean, maybe if she had a real job, she'd get here on time." Loud enough for me to hear. I went cold. She continued to mix her cocktail, as if she were talking about the weather, without even looking at me. An actual job, it was their favorite line. Actual work, as if mine wasn't included. It seemed as though the work one consistently performed, day in and day out, was not up to par, due to the fact that I wasn't in an office, merely because I didn't have a manager yelling at me or wear a name badge. I used to write. I used to write as a freelancer. To pay my rent, I took jobs that paid late, worked strange hours, and occasionally published articles for obscure journals. However, I adored it. I felt alive because of it. I had a purpose because of it. However, to them, it was a pastime, a stage that I ought to have outgrown by now. Biting the inside of my cheek, I perched like an afterthought on the edge of the bench in the far corner. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Someone scooted over a little to provide room. "Have you brought a present?" My mother looked at me and inquired. I took a neatly wrapped box out of my bag, one that I had worked on for hours, utilizing handwritten notes and antique maps that my brother and I used to enjoy as children. I had handmade the journal. He previously expressed his desire to chronicle his travels to me. I smiled a little when I gave it to him. Slowly, he opened it, blinked, and took off the paper. "Oh, nice," he said sarcastically. "Regards." Then he shoved it out of his way. Mom looked at me with half disgust and half pity. "You might have simply purchased something from Amazon," my sister added. "For example, people now journal on their phones." I remained silent. I refrained from crying. I didn't stand up and leave. When my eyes began to water, I merely sat there and blinked away the sting, acting as though the dish was too spicy. They soon resumed discussing my sister's upcoming wedding, my brother's new job, and my cousin's impending pregnancy. My name was never mentioned. Not once. My aunt once said, "Anyway, what are you up to these days?" My mother interrupted me before I could respond. "Oh, you understand. I'm still doing that item." As though I hadn't recently had a piece in a national magazine published. It felt as if my name didn't exist in bookstores, even though it was printed on actual pages, as if that was irrelevant. I chuckled. To myself, quietly, because they were unaware, none of them were aware that I had received a call only 3 days prior. My article had been read by a morning news show producer. She adored it. She wants to highlight me, live on TV me, the invisible one. This refers to the individual who holds a false job title, the person who doesn't have a place at the table. And that's when I realized I needed to take action. Not for them, not to convince anyone of anything. However, for me, I had trouble sleeping the night following my brother's birthday supper. As I lay in bed and gazed at the ceiling, I attempted to convince myself that I was not in danger, that I was merely background noise at another family get-together, hardly audible and quickly forgotten. But it didn't work no matter how many times I told myself that lie. Something had changed within me. Silently, indefinitely. In actuality, this was nothing new. The pain had been simmering for years. I had known this story my entire life, and the dinner was merely the most recent installment. In the home where I grew up, success was defined in a particular way, wearing sharp clothing and shiny shoes. My father worked as a regional sales manager. My mother supported respectable vocations and was an educator. She advocated for respectable vocations such as retirement plans, promotions, lunch breaks, and desks. My brother's admission to business school made them proud. When my sister became a nurse, they were ecstatic. Me? Stories appealed to me. I have always written since I was old enough to read, brief verses, short stories. I drew up worlds and characters on napkins and crumpled notepads. My teachers informed my parents. I had something unique and encouraged me. At home, however, it was written off as, at best, adorable and, at worst, naive. My mother once told me, "You can't make a living doing that," as I was folding clothes and telling her about a high school writing competition I had won. It can't be sustained. You must consider your future, my father continued. Poems won't be used to pay your debts. After that, I stopped sharing. I improved at concealing my victories. When I received $50 for the first time to write an article for a small site, I kept it a secret. I signed the non-disclosure agreement and grinned to myself when I was first hired to ghostwrite a memoir. Eventually, I saved up enough money to live alone in a studio apartment with thin walls and no heat, but I didn't boast about it. I just made it through. My best friend Mariah was the only one who really encouraged me. I'd known Mariah since college. We both sat in the back with our notebooks open, rolling our eyes at the same cliches when we first met in an elective on creative writing. She was the first to read my stories and to reassure me that my belief in them was not insane. She said, "You have a voice, an actual one." However, each time I attempted to express myself to my family by sharing my articles or discussing my projects, they shifted the topic. Or worse, they inquired about my siblings right away after giving me a kind grin. They threw a party when my sister purchased a home. They responded, "Oh, that's nice," when I was published. I recall hearing my uncle remark to my dad in the kitchen one Thanksgiving, "She's still doing that writing thing?" I assumed that by now she would have outgrown it. Later, Mariah and I laughed about it, but it wasn't really amusing. It hurt. The subtlety of it all was the worst. Nobody ever explicitly told me that I was a letdown. Nobody banged doors or screamed. All of it took place in silence. The invitations that were forgotten. There were no questions asked. How my accomplishments vanished into thin air. I became the oddball member of the family. I was the one who was always learning new things. They never stood next to the person they asked to photograph their pictures. I saw a change even on birthdays. My sister received a $200 spa package from my mother one year. I received a coffee mug. She smiled and remarked, "Because you're always writing," as if that explained why the cup was chipped. However, it wasn't the words or the gifts that stung the most. It was the fact that I persisted in my efforts. Attempting to win them over. I am attempting to gain their respect. Attempting to establish my importance. I thought about my mother reading every piece I wrote. I hoped my dad would tell his friends about every byline. I hoped that if I met every deadline, they would see me as more than a joke. However, they didn't. And I believed I was to blame for a long time. Perhaps I didn't succeed enough. Perhaps I wasn't putting in enough effort. Perhaps I was actually pursuing a meaningless dream. The phone call, however, followed. Diane, the morning show producer, had a sharp wit and a voice like warm tea. She expressed her admiration for my article on creative burnout and mental wellness. The editing staff distributed it throughout the office. that they desired for me to discuss it on TV. Live national television. Yes, of course, I replied. But after hanging up, I sobbed while sitting on my flat floor. Not because I was afraid, but because I was seen for the first time in my life, actually noticed me. I also didn't need to be anything else for them. I didn't find a picture from my brother's most recent promotion party until days later, while looking through old pictures. The picture does not include me. However, I had accepted it. That's when it dawned on me. While no one recalled my achievements, I had dedicated my entire life to recording everyone else's. All of a sudden, I no longer desired to remain invisible. I didn't want to become smaller for their convenience. Because my life didn't appear to be as good as theirs, I didn't want to act as though it was. I had given up attempting to get a place at a table that was never open to me. I desired to construct my own, so I got to work making plans, not a plot of retaliation, not a big reveal. However, a silent change, before anyone else notices, the kind you feel in your chest. The interview was in 3 days, and I was aware that everything would soon change. I kept the interview a secret from my family, not immediately. I needed to save that moment for me, not because I wanted to be petty. I wanted something holy for once. Unaffected by their size, their contemptuous shrugs, and their capacity to minimize even the most memorable occurrences. The following few days were spent getting ready. Diane from the network sent along a time slot, some stylistic tips, and some questions. I prepared my responses in front of the mirror until I could speak them without my voice cracking, polished my CV in case someone wanted a follow-up pitch, and borrowed a jacket from Mariah. However, a soft voice continued to murmur at the back of my mind while I practiced. You will be seen by them. There was no warning. It wasn't a wish. It was true. And I woke up 2 hours ahead of my alarm when morning eventually arrived. I sipped lukewarm coffee, watched the morning through my small apartment's cloudy window, and tried not to let the stress of everything destroy the happiness. At 6 in the morning, the studio car arrived, sharp. The driver inquired as to my level of anxiety. I grinned. Not anxious. Simply put, prepared. Everything seemed unreal as I entered the studio. The lights were dazzling. The air was chilly and filled with energy. The bustle of hosts, makeup artists, and production crews passing by with flawless hair and coffee mugs that are pricier than my weekly groceries. I felt as though I shouldn't have been having this dream, but I was. I was mic'd up. My cheeks were powdered. I went over the script for the teleprompter. Suddenly, the countdown had started. 5, 4, 3, 2. A new voice in digital storytelling joins us today. Her most recent piece on mental health has gone viral, and people all throughout the nation have been moved by her honest, unvarnished writing. They then uttered my name, my entire name. Not the sister of my brother, she is not related to the author. Not the supporting character in someone else's show, only me. The interview went by quickly. I answered the questions, although I hardly recall them. During the break, I recall the host squeezing my hand while I was laughing. I recall thinking, somewhere out there, someone who feels invisible might be watching this, as I stared into the camera. And perhaps they will feel seen for once. The producer told me I did a terrific job in the end. They desired to stay in contact. I blinked against the commotion as I stepped outside the building into the morning light. After that, my phone began to buzz. Text messages, makes calls. Notifications from social media are blowing up like confetti. Mariah was what I anticipated. I anticipated seeing some former classmates. Perhaps I was looking forward to seeing my favorite college professor. I didn't anticipate my mother, though. Mom, you were on TV just now. Whoa, that was a surprise. Mom, I got a call from your aunt. You were amazing, she said. Mom, I'm proud of you. I spent a lot of time looking over the messages. For the first time in my life, I understood that she was only proud when other people saw me first, not because I didn't value them, as I was being praised by the mothers in the area, when she was tagged in my video by someone on Facebook, when it was convenient for me to be proud. And I detested how strongly that still affected me. My sister called later that day. She doesn't ever call. Mom is telling everyone you were on national TV, she said right away. She shared it on Facebook as well, she added, stated that she has always had faith in you. I laughed, exhausted and keen. It's funny. I never heard her say that. My sister paused. You are aware of her personality. Indeed, I was fully aware of her behavior. She told me that drawing was a hobby rather than a gift when I was 5 years old. She took away my short writings when I was 12 because she thought they were too gloomy. She pleaded with me to switch from literature to marketing when I was 17. You chose this life, she replied, when I was 26 and unable to pay my rent. Now that I was on television, she was changing the course of history. Her communications were not answered by me. Not quite yet. I required time. I sat in bed that night and read through dozens of comments left by random people, readers' messages. People said that my tale inspired them to write, to speak up, and to heal. I sobbed. Not the tears you keep to yourself, the kind that has a liberating effect. It erases the years of being small, being ignored, and being told you're not good enough. The following week, I received an offer of a book deal, but I kept it a secret from my parents. Or 2 months later, the offer to speak at a conference. Or the podcast asking me to co host a brand new show. Because, in reality, I was beginning to recognize the pattern. They cherished pride's outward manifestation. Not the individual, though. They admired the way they appeared as a result of my accomplishment. However, they never loved me for who I am. At that point, I decided I would continue to achieve success. However, I would give up trying to get their approval. I had stopped doing this for them. I shouldn't have been. And when did they get in touch again? I was going to demonstrate to them how well I knew that. I didn't reply to her post on Facebook. She proudly shared a snapshot of my face from the interview with the message, "So proud of my daughter." You know, the one where she cropped me out of every family photo when I was growing up. She has always been really unique. Likes were made, dozens, hundreds perhaps, former neighbors. The ladies were members of the church. I hadn't seen my distant cousins in a long time. Comments such as, "You must feel incredibly proud. You are the source of her talent. She has always shone brightly. What about my mother?" She responded to each one with a humble brag or a love emoji, as if she had been there for me at every turn, encouraging me. She never once left a remark on my post itself, never gave me a call to check on me. The statements were never even spoken to my face. Online, though, she was the mother of the year, I see. I tossed my phone across the couch and closed the app. I started packing that evening. No melodramatic music. Don't listen to aggressive music. Nothing but quiet. When you eventually quit pleading to be seen, the room was packed with that kind. I carefully folded each sweater. I packed my books in boxes I had kept from a previous move. My college friend made me a ceramic mug that read, "Speak even if your voice shakes." I even wrapped it. The fact that something so delicate had endured this long was amusing. My plan was to leave the city. I planned to relocate to a small guest house in a more tranquil town, situated behind a friend's land. The week prior to the interview airing, I had signed the lease. I had kept it a secret. Not even Mariah knew about it. I wanted a place that felt like mine for the first time in my life. Not because I was hiding anything. Not disclosed, not borrowed, not accepted. Mine. Most of my belongings were gone by the third night. I left behind a broken chair that I had always intended to restore, a lamp that I didn't like, and every single memory that attempted to convince me that I was only deserving when other people thought I was good. I then received the email. I was asked to appear in an episode of a popular docuseries by a producer, not only for the piece, for my story, however, my true tale. My heart was racing as I gazed at the TV. It was more than just a platform. This was a legacy. However, I was aware of what would occur as soon as my family learned. I could hear it in my mind already. We ought to accompany her to the premiere. I assured her she would be famous all the time. I gave her everything because I am her mommy. They would use my suffering as the basis for their news release. I had finished giving out bits and pieces of myself, like free samples at a shop. I replied to the producer's email with one request. If my tale could be portrayed without family footage, I would participate in the show. The show should not feature any home videos. There were no old photos from family reunions or Christmas mornings. Since the people who raised you only love the version of you that matches their narrative, I wanted others to understand how lonely success can feel. He concurred. My phone rang after 2 days. My mother's voice chirped as if nothing were wrong. "Hey, honey, I would like to know when your next TV show is." It's something your aunt wants to capture. I stopped. There's something coming, he said. You won't be in it, though. Quiet. What are you saying? I didn't wince. It's my narrative, after all, not yours. Not Dad's. It's mine, not anyone else's. And I get to choose how it's told this time. On the other end, I could hear the breath catch. The guilt trip followed, following all that we have done for you. And there it was. It was the genuine voice. When she lost control, it was always this one. I didn't speak louder. I refrained from crying. I just said, I wasn't raised by you. Expectations were simply boosted by you. I then hung up. My hands trembled, but not because of terror, from liberty. After shutting off my phone, I went outside. The air was honest, crisp, and chilly. I recalled all the times they had scoffed when I told them I wanted to write. Instead of describing what I did, they always said that I was in between jobs. Every time I entered the room, they would shift the topic, or worse, they would not even acknowledge my presence. And now? They now desired to be included in the narrative. In actuality, though, they never permitted me to be a part of theirs. I wrote as a result. I wrote more than I had in the past. Essays. The letters are addressed to no one in particular. These letters contain concepts for a novel that, until now, I have only partially believed in. And I took back something they attempted to take with each statement. My voice, my tale, myself. The more I wrote, the more I understood that the conclusion didn't need to be about them. It might have to do with me, and the life I was, at last, making a decision about. I didn't get any sleep the night before the show, not because I'm nervous. It wasn't because I was afraid of what people thought. But since my reality was going to be revealed for the first time, no one could take credit. No changes, no filtering. Just the unadulterated, unpolished me that had always been too loud, too unyielding, and too idealistic for my family. In the tiny guest house, I sat on the edge of my bed with my legs folded beneath me, observing the still shadows on the walls, while the wind rustled the trees outside. My phone then began to buzz. Mariah was the one. Are you prepared for tomorrow? She sent a text. After a moment of staring at the screen, I responded, I believe I've been prepared my entire life. I kept my mother's second call that afternoon a secret from her, or that she was organizing a viewing party as she had mentioned in her voicemail. I didn't answer, not because I was upset, but because I had finally realized that their approbation was meaningless if it was limited to situations involving cameras. I watched the program by myself when it eventually aired. Tea in hand, my heart pounding, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, I sat on the floor. As the lights went down, my voice could be heard narrating my narrative. Not in the role of a daughter, not as a letdown to the family, but as a woman who had used the stillness to create something. The floodgates then opened. Remarks, communications, emails, people from across the nation, people who recognized parts of themselves in me. I appreciate you saying what I was afraid to say. Never have I felt so noticed. This was what I needed. I believed that I was alone. I sobbed. It wasn't because I was depressed, but because it was important. Not because of who I was to them, but because of who I was to myself. I mattered for once. My name was trending on Twitter by the next day. One of my interview quotes became viral, in which I stated, your achievement turns into your family's worst annoyance when they only appreciate your compliance. A few others returned the clap. I was accused of being ungrateful by some. However, the majority, they comprehended profoundly. Angry. Then the inevitable occurred. My mom made another post. With a gap-toothed smile and crooked bangs, I'm holding my small certificate in two hands in this picture from my kindergarten graduation. The caption said, from this young child to the incredible adult she is today, we never stop believing in you. Hashtag TV star, hashtag proud mom. She tagged me after that. I kept it to myself. I didn't answer. She would be waiting, though, I knew. A day went by. Next, two. My brother called on the third day. This was the same person who used to mock me for earning a living by manipulating emotions. He didn't inquire about my well-being. He requested me to connect him with my agent. I realized it then. They were still the same, just getting their masks adjusted. And me? My purpose was not to distribute scripts. Thus, I stated, this agent only represents those who are able to express gratitude. And I still haven't heard that. He stumbled, then hung up. Excellent. I received an invitation to speak at a significant creative conference in New York later that week, right after a best-selling author. They flew me out and offered me a modest but important spot. Discovering your truth in a society that fears it was the topic. With calm hands and a clear, low voice, I stood behind the podium, and I shared what I had discovered with the room. Years passed while I worked to become a person my family could be proud of. However, I later discovered that their pride was conditional. And they didn't say anything, was control, not absence. Rejection is not the loudest sound. There is a deeper meaning than just leaving a legacy. We refer to it as self-respect. And you don't need a round of applause when you find it. You don't even require a pardon. All you need is tranquility. There was silence when I was done. Then someone got to their feet, then another. After that, the room stood up. For the speech, no, but for the tale that I could now tell. A young woman in her 20s then approached me with tears in her eyes. She said, "I'm studying art. It's a waste of time, according to my dad. However, after listening to you, I believe I will continue." I grinned. Sincerely. That indicates that I'm in the exact location that I should be. I returned to the tiny guest house in the small town that evening, where nobody had any expectations of me other than to be myself. And that was all. I was mailed an invitation 2 weeks after the show aired, thick envelope, edges engraved in gold. On the front, my entire name is inscribed in cursive, resembling a sentimental, elegant apology. It was for the wedding of my cousin. I hadn't heard from a cousin for more than 5 years. Nevertheless, there it was. We would be delighted to celebrate family and love with you. Family. Once more that word. I couldn't help but notice the irony, particularly when a message from my aunt, the same aunt who once surrounded me in the kitchen during a family cookout and told me I was wasting my talent by writing about people's emotions, was concealed inside the invitation. She wrote, "You've made us all proud. I'm excited to see you there. The family would find it really meaningful." I dropped the card on the table. It didn't imply that they had evolved. I had simply become handy. I failed to RSVP. Instead, I took a road trip that weekend. A collection packed with songs that used to feel like escape plans, The Open Road, and me. I made a pit stop at a roadside eatery halfway through Oregon, the kind of place where the servers called you on, the cups were chipped, and the bottles of syrup were sticky. I was recognized by an older woman behind the counter. She didn't request a picture. The show was not mentioned by her. "That thing you said about family silence being control?" she asked. "That's not how I've ever heard it phrased. Thank you." She gave me a hug as if I were her own after we sat over burnt coffee for 20 minutes. No conditions. Have no expectations. I came to the realization that I had never found more kinship in my blood relatives than I had in strangers. My email was flooded with messages from folks who were in pain when I got home. These individuals included artists, nurses, and educators. Individuals whose lives were colorful and meaningful, but who had consistently been treated as inferior because they didn't conform to the family's expectations. One message was read, "Because I wanted to be a fashion designer, my dad considered me a failure. He died before he saw my work on a runway. I cried when I watched your story tonight because it reminded me of him. I'm not a failure. Simply put, I was never his idea of success." I answered all of the messages, each and every one, because I understood what it was like to feel noticed at last. I never forgot that I had previously sat in a small room, fighting back tears when someone called my passion a joke, even as my career took off interviews, collaborations, a book deal. Then my mother arrived one morning. Not a warning. She held a bouquet of flowers from the gas station and a plastic container of homemade soup on the porch of my guest house. She said, "I thought maybe we could talk." The door was not slammed by me. I didn't speak louder. I simply gazed at her. The same woman who previously told me my profession was embarrassing was there, and I could see it in that stillness. Years ago, she would have laughed at me for carrying flowers. All of a sudden, I ceased to be invisible. I was noticeable enough to cause trouble. So I opened the door for her. The table was where we sat. She didn't inquire how I was doing. She inquired as to why I hadn't texted her back. She said, "I wanted to give you space." "No," I responded coolly. "You wished for me to forget." Startled, she raised her head. "That is untrue," I interrupted, my voice firm, Mom. "I'm no longer upset. However, I also don't forget things." She blinked, looking for something to say. Then she said it. "I wanted to be proud of you forever. I simply had no idea how. It was the closest thing I would ever receive to an apology." It wasn't for me, though. It was for her, for the sake of her conscience. Now that I was being honored in places she wasn't invited to, she couldn't bear the guilt. I assured her that I was doing fine. I was too. Better than mediocre. I was getting better. After that, we didn't communicate much. She occasionally texted. Every time a podcast or blog post highlighted my work, she sent me a link. I only used courteous emojis in my response, because I had discovered that forgiveness does not always entail reconciliation. It's just freedom sometimes. For the following few months, I worked in silence. I took on new tasks. I visited educational institutions, contributed to art initiatives in underserved areas. I once went to a high school class where a teacher had presented my episode to her students as a way to motivate them. A teenage girl approached me with bright eyes and red cheeks. "Writing won't feed me," my mother muttered. "However, I thought that perhaps she was mistaken when I saw you on TV." I dropped to my knees and met her gaze. I told her she was mistaken. "You're aware of it already. Go prove it for yourself then." Not for her. I knew she was going to smile. I felt lighter than I have in years when I left. I jotted down in my journal that evening. At one point, they referred to it as useless. They now refer to it as motivating. However, the work is identical. The sole distinction is that I no longer awaited their approval. The show was broadcast a year ago. By that time, people were sufficiently familiar with my name to stop when they heard it, tilt their heads, and ask, "Wait, aren't you the one from?" However, I was no longer seeking fame. I had discovered something far superior. I was at peace now. On the outskirts of town, I occupied a modest cottage. I was close enough to catch the train when I needed to go somewhere important, but still far enough from the city to hear birdsong in the morning. Books, journals, old sketches, and pictures of places I'd gone and people who had mattered in ways that didn't necessarily make sense. At the time, were all on the shelves that lined the walls. I didn't have any framed headlines or trophies. I simply displayed letters on a corkboard. Readers, students, and others who had felt like outcasts in their families wrote letters to me after hearing my voice reaffirm their own suffering. One letter said, "You told more than just your story. You allowed me to have faith in myself." That's what I remembered. That was the important thing. I went into town for coffee one cool fall morning. I hadn't realized it was the Fall Arts Festival weekend. Main Street was lined with booths. Music was playing, and people were moving in a joyful, unhurried cadence. I was identified by a woman at a pottery stall. She didn't burst into tears. She didn't make any requests. "My daughter writes now," she remarked, "due to you." I thanked her, grinned, and continued. I stopped later that day when I went by a bookshop window. The first book I ever owned was on display in the middle. There was a sign behind it that said, "TV, as seen by a local author, is perceived in the heart." I stood for a long time. Let me absorb it. Not arrogance, not retaliation. Nothing but silence. It was odd. I originally had a different vision of this moment. I had imagined my family standing next to me, applauding and crying as they realized how valuable I was at last. It used to ache how much I craved that. But now that I was alone myself, I was no longer aware of the absence, because I at last understood that the reward was never their approval. It was freedom, liberation from the burden of their demands. They transferred their embarrassment onto me. I had attempted to adhere to the invisible script in order to be sufficient. My life had been rewritten, according to my terms. My cousin called me that evening. The same person who had once made fun of me behind my back for continuing to keep a teenage journal. I was invited to a family reunion by him. He said, "Now they're all asking about you. If you could come, it would be awesome." I stopped. Did they inquire about myself or the version of me who appeared on TV? He took a while to respond. I was already aware of that. I then gave him my gratitude, politely refused, and ended the call guilt-free. Wrapped in a blanket, I sat by the fireplace drinking tea that tasted of gentle defiance and cinnamon. Because this is the reality that they were never able to comprehend, because it didn't come with a salary or a title they could boast about at church. They believed my desire was modest. Because I didn't take the route they paved, they believed I had failed. I didn't fail, though. I was not going to shrink. And as a result, I had created something that was incomprehensible, something more profound than praise, self-esteem. I still occasionally saw my relatives at mandatory gatherings, funerals, and weddings. When it really counted, they tried to smuggle in praises like coins in a jar they'd never filled, smiled too broadly, and posed ambiguous inquiries about the next great thing. They weren't corrected by me. I didn't go up against them, because I had given up on winning. I was already victorious. I sat next to a cousin I hardly knew one Thanksgiving. "They say you changed," she murmured, leaning close. I gave her a quiet grin as I gazed at her. "No," I replied. "I simply quit acting." She remained silent for some while. Then she added, very softly, "I hope I reach it too." I also gave her hand a squeeze. "You will," I said. "The path is already familiar to you. The best retaliation isn't always loud. It's not vindictive. It's not a big spectacle at a family dinner, a takedown, or an announcement. Living the life they thought was impossible, shamelessly, wonderfully, and freely, can sometimes be the best form of retaliation. There are times when performance is sacrificed for peace. It's picking you sometimes. Therefore, if you've ever been told that your dreams are pointless, have you ever been made to feel like the odd one out? If your family only ever appeared after the cameras were rolled, recognize this: you've not failed. You're not invisible. You're not by yourself. You can shine without their spotlight, since you already do, independently.